Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today. I hope all of you are doing fantastic. Today we're sitting down to answer one key question. What's happening with Starfield? There's been a lot of conversation surrounding the game as the months have persisted onward. Many saying the game is dead, it's fallen off a cliff, there's no conversation around it. Many stats saying the exact opposite. There's also been updates that have finally hit the game that were needed at launch, key features missing such as DLSS support, which we'll talk about in a moment, and many wondering when Bethesda is going to announce plans to respond to some of the criticisms that have been put at the feet of Starfield. What's going to happen with the Shattered Space expansion? What's going to happen with modding? How's it going to be handled on consoles? There's many questions still surrounding Starfield, all because many people are anticipating what is happening next. But to cap off this entire conversation, I wanted to get into a very important interview that was conducted by MinMax with Bruce Smith, who served as the senior systems designer for Starfield. So a former Bethesda Game Studios veteran who worked extensively on Starfield, and get some insight into the processes and decision making surrounding this game to kind of perfectly encapsulate what is happening with this game and how Bethesda may or may not respond to the game's biggest criticisms. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, if you're new here and you're into Starfield news, information, conversations, you're in the right place. Please do consider subscribing. I want to start off at the top with the latest patch to hit Starfield because I think it's an important way to set the tone. So the latest addition is DLSS support, which has been posted on Bethesda's Twitter account where they write, "We've been hard at work on Starfield updates and we'll be putting our next one into the Steam beta next week. This update will feature NVIDIA DLSS support with frame generation, display, and HDR controls for supported systems and other optimizations and improvements. You'll be able to opt in to try it via Steam beta options. We'd love your feedback before it goes live for all PC and Xbox players. Stay tuned for specifics soon, and thanks for playing." Now, one of the reasons behind this delay, many believe, although it's never been officially confirmed, is when Bethesda signed that deal with AMD, they were the official PC partner, and AMD claimed, like, we're not doing anything to prevent DLSS from arriving. But I've always said that it may have been in Bethesda Game Studios' best interest to have that arrive later because of that partnership. That is just speculation, we're not sure. But it's finally going to be hitting Steam beta next week. Many people wanting more massive updates, I understand, and I think that's mostly fueled by Cyberpunk, where we've been in the thick of massive updates for that game, because originally those starting updates when the game was completely broken were smaller, quality of life, key feature additions like what we're seeing here. And I don't think it's going to be until 2024 that you see those massive gameplay changes like city maps, for example, hit Starfield. So I'd shift your expectations accordingly. But the reason I wanted to set the tone with that is because despite all the conversation surrounding Starfield, you wouldn't be faulted for thinking it's gone a bit sour. If you head over to Steam, which is not the end-all be-all, but is at least a good gauge on conversation alongside the likes of Reddit and other social media platforms, you'll see Starfield is currently sitting at a mixed review rating, at least for the last 10,000 reviews that have been submitted for the game. This is important because it's not like it's a last wave. We'll show stats in a little bit that Starfield is consistently getting incredible play. Now, I don't want to completely hyperfixate on these review scores, but it is important because it is an update to a previous conversation we had about Starfield's reviews on Steam versus 76's and how they were neck and neck, but the fact that Starfield was in the same company as 76 was kind of confusing to some. I'll say what I said previously, which is that 76 came to Steam with the Wastelanders update, so it had a much better starting point, whereas if it was there at launch, I think it would be well and below where Starfield currently is sitting. But yeah, Fallout 76 currently sits at 71.65% over on Steam, whereas Starfield is at 67.67%. So that gap, which was originally like 0.1, 0.2, and many people believe Starfield would climb above it, is now a much more significant gap. And the reason this is all important to underscore is people do have legitimate criticisms of the game. Many people are complaining about the amount of loading, the exploration, the procedural content, stuff that is important to set the table here. I'm doing all of this so that when we get into the interview, you have all this context. Despite all that, on the positive side of things, if you're Xbox, if you're Bethesda, you are thrilled about Starfield. These Steam reviews probably don't even matter to you. You go over here and you look at what Matt Piscatella of Circana had posted, and it shows that Starfield in the Xbox ecosystem was only surpassed by one game in September, and that was the biggest game on planet Earth, Fortnite. So when it comes to player count, Starfield is absolutely titanic. And you look now, even almost 2 months after launch, and Starfield is still in the top 10 most played games on Xbox next to Battle Royales like Apex Legends. You have GTA 5 there. The newest NBA game is there. You have Roblox there, Call of Duty, Fortnite. You're next to Minecraft, Madden. So Starfield as a single player game is standing there with some of the biggest beasts in the industry. And that is absolutely commendable and cannot continue to be overlooked. Starfield is, as my good friend Jez Corden put it, pretty much a single player service game. Like, you're not just investing now, you're investing into the future, right? Like, you know, they're going to be updates. Bethesda's already promised 5+ years of updates. So many people are excited by that. And I suspect this player count will see massive boosts, where I can imagine Starfield surging back up to the top 3 if they drop Shattered Space and it's really good. Now, with all the data out there, it's time to get into the opinion of things to then dive into the interview segment of the video. Starfield is a game that definitely shows its biggest weaknesses at the front of the experience, right? From the planet count to the procedural content to the guided exploration, the redundant tutorials that oftentimes actually leave you confused. But it's a very special, unique game. And as you go deeper into it, one of two things is happening to people, hence why it's so split down the middle. You have a game that you either fall more in love with due to its magnificence, or you have a game that you become jaded towards because the same issues continue to repeat. The loading screens, another procedural planet, the same content you saw on Planet A is now on Planet Z, and so on and so forth. Now, all of this is to set up what is now this interview here. So let's get into some key quotes from senior systems designer Bruce Naismith, who had some really, I think, crucial things to point out here when it came to Starfield in its development cycle, where he says, Todd Howard pretty much pulled the number 100 for the number of solar systems out of thin air. But the more we went on, the more it was like, okay, so all core activity takes place in these 24 in the settled systems, and the rest of it is open space. But people love our big open games. They love the open area to explore, so let's go ahead and let them have it. I think some of the exploration stuff didn't come through as well as it could have because they decided to make other choices, he says. And never misunderstand this, in every game studio on the face of this planet, they know the choices they're making. They know the things that are not going to be in there. They know what the players are going to moan about, but you've got to make that hard choice. So what this sounds like to me is that over at Bethesda Game Studios, they had a conversation likely saying, hey, we're kind of leaning into procedural content here. 1,000 planets, lots of repeated objectives. Players are definitely going to run into this. Is it worth it? Is the scale worth it? And I think you got to say, according to Todd Howard, it was. And that's because, according to Bruce, all the final say decisions, while Todd will deny it, do go through him. So here's what he said. The success of several Bethesda-produced games meant that the team enlarged to a slightly uncomfortable size, according to Naismith, which partially contributed to his leaving. There were a lot of changes going on, he says, and the structure of the company was also such that, half because of the pandemic and half because of the necessary changes, you didn't get to interact with Todd as much anymore. He was understanding of the change, though. When you're running 6 different studios and you've got a dozen projects going on at a time, he's only one man. But despite the lines of communication becoming a lot more rigid, Howard supposedly had the final say on most creative decisions. All decisions run through Todd. He would hate me for saying that because he doesn't believe it's true. But unfortunately, it is true. He recalled that when developers wanted anything different from the Bethesda usual, they would have to get the idea in front of him. The Starfield lead was also quick to point out that Howard wasn't keen on the organizational structure either. I will give him credit, he has tried really, really hard to not be the last say guy. It's not something he wants intellectually. The studio supposedly molded into that shape because Howard is somebody that has opinions and whose opinions are highly valuable. According to Naismith, the longtime Bethesda director was able to put himself in the seat of your everyday player to a far better extent than the rest of the design team. That attribute meant he was naturally the last say guy because he was able to see it from the Joe Average's player perspective, which makes you wonder a bit about who BGS is catering to. When you look at the dialogue and the questing focus, Starfield, I feel as a longtime BGS fan, is catered directly to me. Absolutely through and through. This is some of the best quest work you have seen in a BGS game. No doubt about it in my eyes. But at the same time, you see a quote like that, and it kind of makes sense where Bethesda catered to the masses. Its sense of endlessness, 1,000+ planets, all of this procedural content, doubling down on what made Oblivion, but stripping out some of the best parts, leaving behind the sense of wandering, the exploring differently. And again, to Bethesda Game Studios' credit, they were aware of this. While they said it extremely late, Todd Howard did say in an interview that the way you explore in Starfield is different, and he wonders if people are going to have a tough time with it, which is a quote we've gone back to ad nauseum, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse here. That I do think, at the end of the day, I really like Starfield, but I think Bethesda sacrificed a little too much to get that vision across the table on what made their studio special. The reason I know that community-wise is because I'm starting to see people complimenting Fallout 4. And for the longest time, Fallout 4 has been destroyed online by fans as this betrayal of all the conventional Bethesda Game Studios designs, right? The legendary weapons, the I'll mark another settlement on your map, the endless radial quest lines, just expanding and bloating the components that were first introduced into Skyrim as major mechanics and focusing on settlement building that was introduced in Hearthfire instead of focusing on questing and exploration. So to see people saying, well, Fallout 4 got this right, it got the point A to point B and the distractions that would take you over and pull you away from your initial objective, and you'd still feel like you've done something meaningful, like Fallout 4 got that right. For me, as someone who's been in the thick of the community for a while, to start seeing that sort of talk, I found it shocking. I really did, because I've always defended Fallout 4. I've always said I think it's a fantastic game. Is it flawed? Absolutely, but I've always gone to the defense for it, famously so, maybe a little too extreme at times. But I look at something like Starfield, and I wouldn't be surprised if this game went through the same discourse. And I hope, and I don't expect much from YouTube, but I would hope people got to this point in the conversation, because while I know it's an honest, critical look at the series, I do think that Starfield is a game, and I said this in my final verdict video. I think I said it in my impressions video when I had about 70 hours in the game. I do feel this is going to be that game that 3-4 years from now, the discourse starts to shift. And I don't know if that'll be because of updates or the general design of the game. That much we'll see. But I do feel like Starfield's a game that'll get its roses much later into its cycle. I think right now, in the heat of an extremely competitive year, I think Starfield, when it's scaled to the likes of Baldur's Gate 3, when it's scaled to the likes of Cyberpunk, I get why for many it pales in comparison. I totally get that. But I think long term, as Starfield fills itself out more, and as people start to see what I think, and this may be sacrilegious to some, I find it to have very much New Vegas style qualities in the way its quest lines are handled, in its approach to its faction work. It reminds me of New Vegas in that way, but it also reminds me of New Vegas in that I remember when the game first came out, many people don't act like this was the case when it first launched, but when New Vegas first released, that was a game that was getting hammered. Many people were like, ugh, it's more Fallout 3, Obsidian lazy. Now it's the most celebrated Fallout game. And you can kind of thank Fallout 4 for that in a sense. I think 2020 hindsight is the definition of a lot of Bethesda Game Studios games as of late. I think even 76 is a benefactor of that. Many people are going, 76 is actually good now. As someone who's been there for every major update, has played it extensively far more than I think I would ever like to, I would humbly disagree with that. But again, I do think that Bethesda Game Studios games have that longer shelf life, have that consistency in their community, where long-term I see Starfield being a game that's loved far more than it is now, as it escapes the more modern scuttlebutt and becomes the product kind of similar to Skyrim, where over time with mods and additions to the title, it transforms into something completely different. So we'll see where it all goes, but that is what's happening with Starfield. And I wanted to cover all of that here today to kind of bring in this conversation of where we are and where we may be heading. So I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this down below. Please do fire away in the comment section. Other than that, be sure to follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Those links are in the description down below. And a big thank you to all the patrons, all the members who continue to support the heck out of the content here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.